Thank you very much for joining me for the Fine Watches podcast, introducing racing legend John Bowe. Thank you very much for coming on.
No problem, mate. We have a mutual friend, so he, I suppose, was the reason I became interested in watches. I think most people that are interested in cars are interested in watches or mechanical watches. But our mutual friend Chris, he kind of introduced me to, I guess, it's just I'm an enthusiast, not really a collector. So, you got to have a lot more money than me to be a collector.
I think, you know what, I think it's interesting that you say that, because on the pod we've talked about enthusiasts versus collectors and the definitions quite a bit. And I think that, if anything, I think I would rather be called an enthusiast than a collector, because really collector's about amassing like ownership, whereas enthusiasm is about, knowing about it, appreciating it for what it is, and you can be an enthusiast with no watches, really. So,
of course you can, yeah, absolutely, no question about that. The how my enthusiasm came about was Chris introduced me to a guy from Watches of Switzerland, which is obviously still operating as a business in quite a few capital cities.
absolutely.
He's a lovely bloke, and he sponsored me. He was the Australian distributor then for Tag Heuer, so he sponsored me. He sponsored Dick Johnson and I, to be honest, through me, and then I asked him to include Dick in the deal. So that's where the enthusiasm started, and then it was in that era that Ayrton Senna was sponsored by Tag Heuer, and they used to use Ayrton Senna in their advertising, and it was so.
They were good. From that, I think I've got a Senna tag here somewhere. It's definitely somewhere here. Yeah, I loved that era with those sort of L-shaped links.
They were called cool. SL something. Yeah, I did too. And then one of my other friends in Canberra is a watch lover, so we talk about watches sometimes. I've owned a few various watches, and I've got a bit of a love for Rolex watches, but the prices in the second-hand market are very, very interesting.
Oh, it's bananas. It's bananas. If you got a few Rolexes a few years back, you'd be pretty happy. Like, they've proven to be a very good investment, although that doesn't happen all the time with watches, and they are coming back a little bit now, but they're still worth a pretty penny. So tell us a little bit about going back to sort of the traditional start of the podcast. What wrist check? Were you wearing something nice today?
Well, I've just come back from the gym, so I haven't got a watch on, mate.
Neither do I. That's the worst wrist check on the podcast history.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Both
wearing.
That's funny.
I've been wearing a Bell and Ross. It's called a Phantom.
Oh, gorgeous! Nice. Yeah,
I think it's hilarious because you can't see it.
You can't read the time. Yeah,
you can never tell what time it is because everything is black.
Yeah.
So I've been wearing that for the last few weeks. So I bought it with a very dear friend of mine who's no longer with us, Jason Richards, who was a supercar, V8 supercar driver.
Yeah.
And he lived across the road from me, and he passed away from a very rare form of cancer 12 years ago yesterday.
Yeah.
So I was in the city with him, probably 14 or 15 years ago, and he was buying a watch for his wife, and I ended up buying this this Phantom,
Yeah.
which so when I want to tell the time, I pull my phone out.
Yeah, they're a funny watch those. I had one come through my, sort of my store, and wow, like it was just cannot read anything. And even the loom on it, like you'd think at night time you could read it, but they made the loom so like deep purpley black that you can't read it anyway. What do you well speaking actually I have to ask you this question, it's off topic with watches. Speaking of the Richards name, you were on the podium for the pack of arseholes incident.
Yes,
Tell us about that, because that is such a legendary moment in Australian motorsport history. You know,
yeah, yeah, it is,
even
mate.
though you were
Tragic.
competing and all that sort of stuff, like it must have been a very very unique situation.
Yeah, but it was strange. It's a different Richards family, obviously, but they're both Kiwi families. Yeah, the it was the '92 Bathurst. It was the rain red flag incident with the Nissan that Jim Richards was driving, and we, Dick Johnson and I, basically we thought we'd won the race, but we should have read the rules better
Yeah,
because because
we'll talk
when you
about
have a
we'll talk about Lewis and Max in a second, but go on.
yeah,
Yeah,
so they stopped the race, and then of course they go back one lap, and during that one lap, uh, Jim Richards, who's a friend as well, I'm a great admirer of him as a driver
yeah,
and a bloke. He crossed the line, so they go back a lap. So he was in the lead, so they won the race, even though the car was wrecked at the top of the hill, top of Conrod Street.
yeah.
So we go to the podium, and yeah, it was just a very strange moment, to be honest. And having watched it a few times since, the officials had no choice. I mean, they had to stop the race. The track was blocked.
Yeah,
So if the crash hadn't happened, yes, we would have won the race because we stopped, or Dick stopped and put wet tyres on, which would have navigated the track easily. But Jimmy didn't stop and aquaplaned coming up the mountain through just after the cutting and tore the front wheel off it. So then when he
yeah.
got to Forest Elbow, he was, anyway.
He couldn't.
It's
Yeah.
what if is one of those things. I mean, I still have people ask me about it, and I mean, it is what it is.
But just even
But
even in terms of I mean, I mentioned Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton in what is a similar situation where it's an interpretation of the rules, and from appearances one person won or should have, and whatever. I'm just thinking in terms of, I mean, that stuff happens in motorsport all the time with rules, but I'm just thinking about the podium moment. I mean, I happen to have I don't know if you've seen the guy who sells the pack of arseholes bitter down at but I mean, it was
an opportunity.
such a charged moment, and I would have thought that it would have almost been scary to be on that podium, right? The crowd's ready to kill people or whatever.
Yeah, well, the crowd were on our side, so
So that was all right for you. Yeah,
we were the good guys in their eyes anyway. But I mean, if you dig underneath it all a bit, it
yeah,
doesn't matter whether it's Bathurst or a Grand Prix or a Le Mans or whatever. There is in the race control, there is a race director, and he has other people around him that are advisors, and the decision is taken by them collectively. Ultimately, sits with the race director.
yeah,
And whether he's right or wrong, he has to make the call. And in the Bathurst case, it was the right call. It was Tim Schenken back then, and
yeah,
it was the right call. With the Max Verstappen thing, I happen to agree with that as well. I think it was the right call.
yeah.
But
It's
as
interesting you say that, because most people are up in arms about that, but to me, it's okay to the letter of the law. Maybe there are a couple of other cars that needed to unlap or whatever, but they weren't obstructed by those cars. Like those cars would have been well out the way, and it would have been a technical win for Lewis because they had to finish under the safety car because there weren't enough laps to restart or whatever. And as it was given the season, and they were 1 point apart, and they two titans in both excellent cars, and da da da. Like there's never been a more exciting finish to a season of motorsport ever. Surely, like
No, but I mean, once again, it was the fresh tyres on Max's car that allowed him to comfortably pass. So,
yeah,
Mercedes team could have done the same thing, but they didn't. So at the end of the day, Max won, and so he should have won. But the Mercedes group uh, kicked up a fair amount of fuss, and in the end, it cost Michael Massey's his job, I think. Which is
yeah, oh,
which was
definitely, absolutely. If not just from a political point of view, they had to do something to because the fans around the world would live it. So let alone Mercedes.
well, it's a bit like in our case. Go back to 1992. Dick on the microphone on the podium, he whipped the crowd into a frenzy, and Lewis and Toto whipped the world into a frenzy after that. So I
Yeah, they
mean,
did.
when you've been around motor racing as long as I have, you you tend to learn, and it is a learned behaviour. You learn to roll the punches, otherwise you drive yourself insane.
Yeah. So what was it? I always ask people for the pod what got you into watches, but what got you into racing? What was it that sort of made you? Because everybody, a lot of boys go karting and go, oh, that's cool and da da da, but not everybody goes right. I'm going to do this forever. Do you think it's just talent that people get told, look, you got a bit of talent, you should pursue it, or is there must be something that drives people to do it?
Well, in my case, I grew up in a family that was involved in cars and motorsports. So my dad prepared other people's cars at a state level in Tasmania, where I grew up,
Yeah,
and we always had a racing car of some description in our garage, which was just a suburban garage, normal garage. He was a mechanic, and I grew up around racing cars, and I spent weekends at racetracks, hill climbs, sprints, things like that. So it was sort of inevitable, possibly, that I would start racing. Now, starting racing when you're 15 or 16 doesn't mean you're going to be racing when you're 100, which is what I feel like sometimes. So, the resilience and the determination to keep going is something that, you'd have to get a team of psychologists and psychiatrists to work that.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. But I do know that I love it. I love the sport. I love most of the people in it.
yeah,
Not everybody,
yeah,
but mostly. And I love the competing, and I love the driving. The driving part of motorsport is ultimately what you start doing, and that's what you love. And I love it. I still love it, and I'm going to do it again next year. So when I stop, will be two things. It'll be whether I can still do it,
yeah.
like physically and mentally, or whether I can still get a drive in something or afford to drive in something. So it's not over yet. The journey's not over yet. It
Yeah,
might not have my watch journey, although the motorsport, like my, if you sort of said what sort of watch would you have if you had an open check, I'd have I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Langenstein
Hang on, song.
or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Langenstein? Yeah. Well, I'd have one of
Beautiful.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
are
But
a magnificent watch. Yeah, absolutely.
so and I haven't got one, and the motorsport is very much dependent on funding. You need
Yeah,
funding, and unless you're very wealthy, you need people to help you, which fortunately for 50 odd years I've been able to do it. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful.
yeah. So when I asked Tim, when I spoke to Tim, who's previously been on the pod, I
Mm.
asked him about uh, the whole timing thing in motorsport, but making that sort of connection between watchmaking and motorsport. And there's been sort of innovations in watchmaking, specifically influenced by motorsport, with development of chronographs and stopwatch function and all that sort of stuff. And I think Tim's started in motorsport a little bit before you, where there would have been slightly older technology involved initially and all that sort of stuff. Although in sort of Formula One, they were starting with the embedded timing loops and all sorts of stuff, even when Tim was driving. Um, but my question was, when you listen to drivers talk, particularly the F1 guys and the V8 guys, like anyone at a sort of at an elite level, but racing drivers talk about, oh, I think there's a tenth there, I think there's a tenth there, and usually that is remarkably accurate. And so
Yeah.
what I get, and Tim gave me a sort of a broad answer that you can sort of tell your speed through a corner because of revs or whatever. But do you think that racing drivers use that to describe, I can go a bit faster in that section? Or do you think that racing drivers can actually tell time? They know, from the time past where you should be on the track and all that sort of stuff. How to
I think
watch.
it's a subconscious thing. I think if you've done a fair amount of it, your brain gets tuned to it, and if you quite often you might do a lap and you go, well, I've dumped a couple of tenths over there or something because something has happened that's not quite right. It might understeer, oversteer. You might hit a curb too hard or something. I think it's part of being brain trained to be a racing driver, and I think I certainly nowadays I have a lot of brain training experience. I can generally get in a car within a few laps understand what it's all about and drive it to a reasonable level. So that's brain training. That's not natural ability. It's just, obviously you have to have natural ability to drive it in the first place. But it's
Sure.
very complex.
But I'm
Being
talking
a
more from a time point of view. Like people can get. I mean, obviously, you need to get in a car and feel its understeer versus oversteer characteristics and how much body roll it's got, or steering angle, steering ratio, speeds, and that kind of stuff for sure. But I'm talking more about the time bit because as we spoke briefly last week, I was sort of saying it seems that racing drivers live a bit like Jedi. Like you can see 20 seconds down the road. You know what I mean? Like racing drivers can see faster or into the future a little bit. And so do you think it's a time thing or it's just a gut feel thing and it's sort of a
oh, it's a gut feel.
it's a generalization rather than an accurate measure of time?
Yeah, I think it's a generalisation. I think it's and I mean, I can only speak for myself. I can't see inside other drivers' heads, but I think anybody that does it for quite a long time and at a reasonable level has that trait. It's I don't think it's anything unusual. It's just and to get back to racing drivers as a sport, it's a very non-understood thing. Any other sport that I can think of, anyway, you can go have coaches, go to the Institute of Sport, have a path to follow. With motorsport, there's no real path. I mean, of course, there's categories that are seen as a progression,
Yeah.
but not it's not set in concrete. So I'd love to be a young academic and do a PhD on the psyche of a racing driver, but that time's passed, unfortunately.
I,
I don't think I've got the brain power for it anyway.
I've been really lucky. It's funny you say that because I've been really lucky through my Tim Sheehan's son is a very very good friend of mine. So I've
Yeah,
known Tim and sort of been in moderately in his orbit for a long time, and that included when for example, when the A1 series sort of
yeah.
still exists, which I miss. Like I actually thought that was really
I think
entertaining.
great,
That was bloody awesome.
fantastic,
Motorsport. Um,
but it requires someone to fund it, and that's where it all went astray
the
eventually.
entire
So
thing, yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I got to meet quite a few really, really, you know, big name drivers, and it strikes me that all drivers have, at the top level, that there's sort of there's something missing in the in the range of feelings around fear and sort of the ability to remain rational under pressure, which is why so many drivers are also good business people. That it have you also have this characteristic of kind of the fear bit is not, and also most racing drivers don't seem particularly sort of sentimental. Like I met Mark Webber at one thing and said, "Oh,
yeah,
I used to have a Weimaraner, and that aren't they good dogs? I've got a couple." And he goes, "Oh yeah, no, she died a while back." And I was like, "Oh, that's terrible." And he was kind of like, "Yeah," really casually, "Oh yeah, it knocks you around a bit, doesn't it?" Like he was. When I've lost dogs, I've been devastated for years about
yeah,
it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, she was all right." Like, it's. Do you think that's
yeah.
true? Do you think that's one of the things that gives racing drivers the ability to do what they do?
Once again, it's generalisation, but I mean,
Of course.
yes, you've got to be uh, a little bit removed from. It's not that you can't be upset about things, but you do need. For instance, once again, I can only talk about myself, but as a person, uh, as a human being, I can be quite an emotional character.
Yeah.
I'm touched by emotion, but as a racing driver, I'm not touched by emotion at all. Even when people do bad things to you, which can happen, and recently happened when I raced in Adelaide only a few weeks ago. One of the other guys punted me off. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's you need to remain calm, otherwise you get out of the car and start swinging punches, and that's happened before.
Yeah.
I mean, people have attacked other drivers, and that's a really good way to get yourself banned.
Yeah.
So I think over time you learn behavioural patterns, and
Yeah.
in motor racing, I'm very unemotional, but as a person, I can be emotional. So once again, it's very complex, way more complex than it is, say, swinging a tennis racket or something.
Yeah. So going back to the watches. So you said you had a deal with Tag.
Yeah,
So what did you get some special watches out of that, or did you sort of you developed a
yeah,
love?
I did. I got SEL, I think they were called. Those ones with the,
Yeah.
and then they became the Link,
Yeah.
so
The
which
Link
is
series.
modified book. So your center would be a Link watch,
No, I
I
think it's the
reckon.
last of the SEL. So it's the one with the three dials,
Okay.
and it has the two little digital windows as well.
Yeah.
At
Okay.
the
Yeah.
bottom.
I
Yeah.
know. I know the watch here.
Yeah.
So I did get several watches. One of them was a 6,000 series, and it was gold, solid gold.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So it was way too blingy for me. I'm pretty. No, I like to think I'm normal, but maybe understated's a better word. But
Yeah.
so when I joined Brad Jones Racing, Brad had a deal which was Lauder Air at the time, which was
Yeah.
Nicky Lauder's airline, which had been taken over by Austrian Air or something, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, long and the short of it, I swapped my watch to Brad for two business class return tickets to Austria.
Wow. Yeah.
That was because the watch wasn't. It didn't really suit me anyway.
Yeah.
And Brad's a bit more of a blinger than me, so
Yeah.
very mutually advantageous, let's say. Uh, Beautiful watch, but I'm not a gold watch lover, so there
Yeah.
you go.
And tell us about some of the other watches you've come across, either through, the sponsorship deals or ones that you've sort of acquired yourself that you don't mind discussing there with me.
Well, I've got a Rolex Submariner, but I mean, Submariners. Everybody's got a Submariner, haven't they? Really, almost.
They're common, but people, I don't know, and that's one of the things that's blown me away about the jump in value of them is that they're hardly a rare watch. Like,
No, they're not.
I mean, they're a bloody good watch, don't you know? I mean, I've been accused before of Rolex bashing on here, and I don't bash the brand or the product at all. I just think the market is ridiculous around Rolex. And
It's a bit like Ferrari. They've done this incredibly wonderful job of marketing and creating an image for themselves. And I guess a Submariner is probably the most recognizable watch in the world, really, isn't it? It's
yeah,
you look and you can and it's copied by many in some way. There's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
other brands that do the so.
And so it should
Anyway,
be. It's perfect watch design, really. It's amazing watch.
yeah, I had a Daytona that I sold it recently.
Nice.
Uh,
There was another one that has gone absolutely bananas.
yeah, yeah, no, they have. I mean, I sold it to a friend who always wanted one, and you can't buy one, so.
Yeah.
uh,
Helped
so
you out. Lovely.
yeah, well, I mean, it's as I've mentioned earlier in the thing that uh, financing motorsport, unless you're maybe even a Formula One driver, some of them I'm sure bring sponsorship. So yes, you got to pay the bills, and that was a method of helping pay the bills.
Yeah.
And really, I didn't wear it much anyway. So
Yeah. And you mentioned Bell and Ross. So you tag Hoyer through a deal, Rolex, because, lots of people have Rolex because they're good. And you mentioned Bell and Ross. Are there any other sort of smaller brands, sort of independent brands that you have your eye on, have pieces from that you?
I've honestly, I've got a Monaco,
Yep.
a black. No, it's a black case,
Yeah.
which
What's
I
that,
actually bought.
Dark Lord or whatever that's
I
worth.
don't know what it is.
Yeah.
We were going with one of my mates. I went to a guy called Joe Collegia. I went to America with him several times and raced with him, raced his cars. So I was going out of Tullamarine and I bought it. It's probably 10 years ago,
Yeah.
which I think is an iconic tag Hoya
Yeah.
wristwatch, isn't it?
Oh, they're
it's a
gorgeous. Yeah.
yeah. So, but I bought it just because of that. Now there's about 80,000 different versions of it.
Yeah, they've gone bananas with the Monacos, and I think it's a pity. Like, tags seem to have moved away from that classic collection now. I mean, the Carrera is kind of a sort of a catch-all name that they apply to so many different watches within their range, and it's applied to so many different styles, like completely different style watches.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but I think I mean, I love vintage Hoyas. I think there are
I do
so
too.
many super, super cool watches. And some of the ones that you don't see a lot, like the Kentucky and there are all these kind of cool ones that are a little bit more rare, the Montreals and, all those that they have
The Silverton, the even the Monza. I actually would
Monza's
love
gorgeous.
a
Yeah.
yeah. And there's another one that's resurfaced in the last few years that was associated with Joe Siffert, who was around in
Oh, the
Tim's.
Altavia, the Altavia.
Oh, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, yeah. I've often
Yeah.
thought about trying those, but you know,
The
I
old
guess
ones
my
are amazing. Yeah, they're amazing. They're beautiful.
yeah, yeah, I
You
love
know, the
that too.
place to get those is Japan. There's plenty of those over there, and they're
Yeah,
pretty reasonably well priced. And you know, Japanese people tend to look after stuff. You know, so they're
yeah, yeah.
really good condition old watches over there. And
My my son, my youngest son, was in Tokyo for 4 or 5 years doing his PhD, and I visited him once, and I bought a moon watch there.
yeah,
Their watch stores are fascinating, aren't they?
oh,
Like
amazing.
as general terms.
Oh, amazing! Look, I did earlier in this season of the pod. I spent about a month in Japan, and partially buying watches, partially doing some other stuff. But yeah, Japan's watch market is, I would argue, one of the highest quality in the world, if not the best in the world. I mean, it's, you know, certainly for accessible stuff. You know, I mean, you can go to you know, the Middle East and see some very, very expensive watches, and you know,
Yes,
but Japan is, you know, if you're the sort of $1,000 to $5,000 market, there's so much value there. Bell and Ross that you mentioned. I don't know if you're familiar with Zins, SINN watches, a German.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know, they're quite popular over there. That kind of stuff that actually represents very high quality without necessarily the price tag is popular in Japan. And as I said, they really look after it, which is great. So
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I'm aware of lots of different. I mean, it's like I'm aware of lots of different cars. It doesn't mean I own them.
yeah,
The same with watches. I've had 100, 200 cars in my life, but I haven't got very few now.
yeah,
So I'm not a. We go back to that. I'm an enthusiast, and the same with watches. I wander down Collins Street and look in the windows, and yeah,
and that'll do. So-
yeah. I mean, I've got I've still got a love of them, but I doubt very much whether I'll be buying any more watches. Although I might make an exception with the Ortavia.
I think
It's
you
just
would.
that era of Formula One, which was basically when Tim Schenken was in it,
Yeah,
was very exciting. It was the time aerodynamics really got up and going, and tires got bigger and fatter, and it was an exciting time. So, and the racing was incredibly dangerous. The cars were built out of aluminium and rivets and a bit of glue, and like the circuits. If you went off the circuit, you hit something fairly solid. So that was as a kid where my interest in Formula One came from. So
yeah. Well, I
so
think I think
the,
that time was so fascinating generally, right? Like, well, not just for motorsport, but for watches as well.
yes, yes,
For interior design, you look at houses from the late '60s, early '70s, and there's all these beautiful colors and whatever. Everything's sort of very, and watch design from that period is certainly my favorite sort of era. Where you see these beautiful dials with sub dials with colors on them and all sorts of stuff. It was super super cool.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree absolutely. So, what you're a watch dealer? Can I ask a
Trader,
question?
yeah. I mean, I try and call myself a trader rather than a dealer. I mean, I'm a dealer. Um, I basically it started. Uh, I started fine watches many many years ago with a friend, and what it started as was like sort of, but just before the GFC, the exchange rate with Japan was ridiculous, and like 115 yen to the dollar, and their prices. Uh, on watches. The Japanese watch market's really interesting, and it continues to today. This was back in 2006. In Japan, watches have a serial number, which might very often, like cars, tell you when the watch was made. So they change part of the serial to reflect the year or whatever. And
Yeah.
the Japanese market doesn't want to buy a watch that's not this year and brand new. So you could go into a Rolex store and be looking at a Submariner, which essentially hasn't changed for 60 years or whatever. Okay, before the pundits get onto me and say there's been a million variants, but you know what I'm saying. And and but they won't buy like last year's watch, even if it's
Okay.
exactly the same as this one. So there's quite a big sort of clearance market over there, and we would parallel import watches drop shipped um, until the GFC just destroyed it overnight because the arbitrage on the exchange disappeared. So then, sort of during COVID and a little bit before that, I had started buying lots of watches and sort of realized, but I always retained the business name and everything. And then my collection started to get to the point where it was, maybe this should be a one in, one out arrangement now, and
Yeah.
just restarted it. And it's been really good. I try and just keep my dealing to bringing really high quality pieces in. I mean, everybody sort of says that, but I don't go out. I don't chase Rolex
No, no.
deals, flip deals, and all that sort of stuff, which a lot of watch dealers do because that's the
Yeah.
quickest and easiest way to make money out of it. I'm fortunate that this is not how I sort of have to make money. This is really an enthusiasm thing for me, and I move the watches to kind of you know feed
So
my
what's your business called?
finewatches.com.au.
I'll have to have a look.
Please, yeah, please. Uh, and
And look at watch sites. I mean, so I wouldn't say my addiction is gone. It's just tempered.
that's the nature of addictions, right? Is that they sort of come and go. I usually ask people, sort of on the pod, what's your favorite watch you've had over the years? Have you got sort of any regrets of some you've let go? And you just mentioned you've had lots and lots of cars. What
Yeah.
Tell us about your favorite. Have you got a favorite that sort of you either still have or you should never have sold, sort of thing?
Oh, there's lots I should never have sold. I've owned lots of different cars because I'm a car enthusiast, have been since I was a child. But I've owned 37 Porsches in my life,
Wow.
and I I always make jokes out of it. I sold every single one of them before the price went up, and I mean a
Yeah.
lot of classic Porsches are worth a lot of money nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but I actually love Porsches. I've got a little normally aspirated Boxster S, which I use now and it's just an everything to everybody. It's a beautiful little
Yeah.
car. It's fast enough if you want to go fast, which you can't anymore. It's comfortable. You could let your nana drive it.
Yeah.
So that's my favourite car. I've owned Ferraris and Lamborghinis and BMWs and Mercedes and you name it, I've had it.
Yeah.
But
Box
most of them,
Boxster S is the one you reckon?
yeah, it is for me. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's probably half the price of the same model 911 on the used market,
Yeah.
and it's better car.
Yeah.
So the
Well,
only thing is,
theoretically, even on the edge, like a Boxster should be a better car, right? Like given everything
oh,
else equal, because it's
it's
mid
no doubt
engine.
it is better. No question, it's better. But 911 it's like Rolex watches and Ferraris, and they've got this wonderful sort of mythical image about them. Not that I think there's anything wrong with Rolex watches. I love Rolex watches, but
Yeah.
it's just what you make of it. I'm sure there are Porsche pundits, as you call people, that'll make a comment and say he doesn't know what he's talking about, but I actually do.
In this case, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think that I think that's a common thing where a lot of times it's and in cars, I've spent a lot of time in cars because I used to work in cars myself,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I've never driven competitively, but I've always liked sport driving. So had
yeah.
go
Rapid
kart.
motor.
I've had a go kart, and I've drive a John Cooper Works Mini daily, and whatever. And I think it's interesting because I think that most people, the Rolex Porsche thing is a really interesting example from a sort of a branding psychology point of view. I think both of them are unarguably, in some ways, the best. They are perfect products. Like the 911, okay, you can sort of debate the engine over the back thing, but not being necessary. But in a way, it's as close to perfect as you can get. It looks the same as the first one. Like, the
Yeah, yeah.
design is so perfect and all that. Like, and it's the same with the Submariner. But I find that it's really cynical. Like, I think that if the people who just get into cars, worship Porsche as being the best thing possible, and people who just get into Rolex worship that as being the best thing possible. And what they're worshiping is not actually what's good about that product for someone who knows, for a driving or from horological, mechanical watchmaking point of view. They're simply worshiping the brand. And it takes somebody who knows how to steer to get the best out of a 911. I mean, I had I'm sure you got way better Porsche stories than mine, but this one's quite funny. I think I used to work at the Porsche Center with Michael Barker and
Yeah, yeah.
Austin King and all those guys a long time ago, and when they were still under the silos over there. And one night I got to take home an 80s whale tail cabriolet. And someone said to me, I mean, I remember the first time I took a 911 out, that one guy that working there said, I've seen you drive, Benny. I know you think you can drive, but with this car, the engine's over the back. Remember that you can't drive. And that car still had traction control and da 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 da. That was a modern 911. And then took this whale tail 80s thing, and I lived in sort of Malvern at the time, and I was coming to the Vic Ave property there, and I was coming onto that sort of downward slope bit of Hotham Street next to the big Como mansion, and I came. So you're turning right downhill, sort of patchy rain. And I came out and I was joining traffic. I genuinely was not being a dickhead at all. Like, thought I was pulling gently out into traffic onto a sort of a rain slicked road. And the back of this thing just kept going round completely unexpectedly at all. And I ended up on the other side of the road facing up the hill and just kept going back into the street as if I meant it. Like, but I mean, that just showed me, like, and that was a time when I'd already been driving go karts and all that. Like, they were a pig of a car in some ways. Like, it's
Well, tricky. Yeah, they're very style. We used to do, and I used to do sort of driver training and things like that. And I always say to people that are driving 911s, particularly the older ones, you can't do anything with it when the back is up in the air.
yeah,
So you're braking and turning,
yeah,
you've got a problem.
yeah,
If you release the brake and you get to ride height, normal height,
yeah,
you can do anything with it.
yeah,
So it's style centric really, and I've only ever done, I think, 2 or 3 races in 911s. One was an old one, early 70s, and one was a mid 90s, and they're still much the same. And I don't know about these new cup cars and things. They look like they're quite good, but I think they're still style centric because of that thing that's hanging out the back.
Yeah.
I reckon Porsche have spent 60 years proving to the world that they put the engine in the right place when everyone knows they didn't.
I absolutely didn't. Yeah, yeah. So having driven, so many incredible, and I get for sure that even a sort of GT2 RS is still not a race car. Like if it's got carpet and whatever, it's just not a racing car at all, right? What do you think, having driven basically everything? Because your career has been almost exclusively tin tops, right? Like you haven't really done sort of.
Oh, no, I raced open wheelers in my early life. I didn't race. I didn't start tin tops until the mid '80s.
Right.
Really, because and I only did it not because I loved it. I kind of learned to love it.
Yeah.
Uh, in Australia, the only way to have a proper, say, career, for want of a better term,
Yeah.
is in a touring car. So
Yeah. Right. Right.
that's I sought out a drive, and I ended up with a drive, and I ended up being in it for a very long time.
Yeah. But I guess the
Uh,
essence being that in your sort of senior career, in your sort of elite career, it's largely been tin tops, right? And
yeah,
and so you've driven basically everything with a roof, and I think tin top. The point being that tin tops more closely uh, relate to road cars insofar as in GT you're driving a Gallardo or a 430 or a 911 of some description or whatever. Like it's a car that people
yeah,
think that they're looking at that is the same as a road car, right? Although
yeah.
they're not. What do you think, having driven all of those, is your favourite car of all time? Is it actually a Boxster? Like, is it, or is it, it's
Do
just,
you mean a race car or
yeah,
a road car?
well, no, I mean, I guess, well, both, I guess. So part A, part B. So favorite race car, and then favorite by extension, road car version of
The last
homologation special or whatever.
was always the later the model, the better the car, because it's just evolution. The last lot of GT3 racing I did was in a 488 Ferrari GT3, which was a fantastic car. Very, very, very competent car. It's probably arguably out of date now, but very, very good car. And I've enjoyed Porsches more as road cars than I've had a few, two or three Ferraris, and I know people that have got them, so I've driven them quite a lot. I think people buy Ferraris for the badge, the brand, the going down to the Cars and Coffee on Sunday than they do, because there's nowhere to drive them fast unless you do track days.
Yeah,
You can't drive. You can't drive them fast on the road anymore. You just can't.
yeah,
First of all, it's probably arguably dangerous
yeah,
because they're so fast that not many people are capable of driving them properly.
yeah,
And particularly Victoria, but New South Wales not much better. And I imagine the other states are following suit. They have a camera on every second tree, or post. So
yeah,
as, as the cars get better, the laws get tighter.
yeah,
And so, and the manufacturers keep making quicker cars. So why is that? I do not know, but
yeah.
it's a fact, isn't it? So
Well, it's interesting to me. Like, I think that, I mean, my John Cooper, now that it's worked, I took it to a race tuner and got it subtly tuned, like just a stage one, didn't do anything physical to it or whatever. But after the tuning, that car is, and I say this only for illustrating the point, is that car is as quick 0 to 100 as the first edition Lamborghini Countach was.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, and that's not a particular. Again, I don't know where these bubbles come from. They started coming out. I had, if you one of them does like one of them does streamers and all this stuff. The But the point being that there are so many cars now that in the 70s would have been called supercars,
Yeah, they were.
that are entry level, hot hatches or whatever.
Yes.
And that's the problem, is that, throughout my driving history, and I've been lucky to get to drive a lot of things because of where I've worked. I worked at Aston Martin and Porsche and all sorts of places. I mean, some of the funnest cars, and I still love the Mark One MX-5, and that thing's got bloody 90 kilowatts or something.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. We,
Magnificent car.
my family were Mazda BMW dealers in Devonport, which is only a little
Yeah.
town in Tassie. And I
No,
mean,
well, the North.
I worked there from the time I left school, really. And the MX-5, when it came out, the first edition was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Groundbreaking. And
Yeah.
I've got a I think they call them NC, the model, but it's a MX-5 SE, which was a factory turbo that
Oh,
they
cool.
made.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They made for about 1 year.
yeah.
And every time I drive it, which is very rarely, I think to myself, why would you spend $300,000 or $400,000 on a soft top Porsche or whatever
Yeah.
when you can drive this thing? It's a perfect little car. It's got a
Yeah.
little a turbo engine which is very understressed. It's got a
Yeah.
6-speed gearbox. It's got power steering, air conditioning. It's all analog.
Yeah.
It's just a
And that
wonderful car.
the gearbox is just the
I know.
wrist
It's
for
like a
gearbox. A magnificent car.
rifle bolt. It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's what it would be worth because I'm going to sell it shortly. But
Before you do, please call me about that one, because I'm thinking about another MX-5 because they're just such a good car. Like,
well, this is rare. Like we'd stopped being a dealer by that stage. It's 2004.
yeah,
And it's done 72,000 kilometres, and it's got 12 services filled in the book.
yeah,
So I bought it for my partner, basically,
yeah,
but she drive it much because it's a manual. So,
yeah.
it's fabulous. It's just,
I just remember that
I
I got the 67th car ever made of the five.
really,
Yeah, like the very, very first one. And I just remember for years, for about nearly 20 years, the reference point in motoring journalism in magazines was the MX-5. So a new Boxster had come out, and they would say, whilst not as nimble as an MX-5, it is this.
yeah, yeah,
It was just
yeah.
the definition of handling and rider and driver and car being at one, and
Yes,
all that sort of stuff. And they're just sensational little thing. It's amazing.
yeah, absolutely agree. And so this car, like of mine, it's like a classic and a rare classic without the money. So, I honestly don't know how much it's worth, but it's not worth a lot of money. I know that, and
Yeah,
yet when you drive it, you go, wow, you just can't fault it. And I like analog. I recently I was in Sydney and I hired a car. It was an Audi A3. It might have been an S3, an S3. Uh, and I couldn't work all the gadgets in it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You need to do a course before you drive it.
Audis
So there's,
tend to be tech heavy, don't they? Like, there's a lot of
uh,
stuff in there.
like I had it for 3 days and I still didn't know how to work anything.
I think my favorite, to answer my own question from all, the favorite car that I've ever driven, because I didn't own it, was when I worked at the Porsche Center. We had a B4 Audi RS4. So I
Oh
think
yeah,
the first RS4, the one that was only made as a station wagon, and it had a Cosworth 2.7 liter bi-turbo in it. Like, there was
a
actually,
V wasn't
yeah, 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 yeah,
it?
and they were real Cosworth engines. Like, they were ones that had been done at the Cosworth factory, not bought a sticker or something. And I remember driving that thing around Melbourne, and people like, someone would be at the lights in a Porsche or something, and you see ya, like, and they come at the next lights, and go, what the fuck have you done to that? And it's like, no, this is how they made it. And you could put shopping in the back, you put the dog in the back or whatever, and it was a beautiful car inside. They were a magnificent thing. I like that.
I think they're quite collectible nowadays, but most of them are like, if you muck with a turbo car
Yeah,
too much, I mean, stage one, as you talk about your Mini, is fine, but if you muck with it too much,
yeah,
it ruins it.
yeah.
So most of those RS4 wagons or Avant or whatever they call them, they've all been mucked with. There wasn't many of them anyway, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it? We
Yeah.
could talk about the car world forever, mate, but I've got work to do.
We could indeed. So for the traditional finishing point of the Fine Watches podcast, you did mention it before. Your Grail watch, the A. Langer and Son. So I'll have to close with another question. Grail car, like money, no object. You could have any car in your collection at all. What would it be?
A Porsche Turbo S.
Nice.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
it's an animal or like a new one or an old one?
all things to all people, though.
Yeah.
They're so docile and tractable and easy. You could let your Nana drive it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to, it goes, like a fired out of a cannon. So it just a complete lovely motor car. Like I know you can buy things that are way rarer and faster, but not for me.
Lovely.
I've matured. I think I've matured.
Fantastic. John Bowe, thank you so much for joining me for the Flying Watches podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much.
I've done plenty of podcasts, but never one about watches. So good on you.